Have you ever had this killer app idea? This idea you knew if only you had the ability to build, you could actually build it and it ultimately changes the world. If you're a software engineer or an aspiring software engineer, you probably have. But there are a lot of things stopping you from taking the leap and starting to code the web app, desktop app, or mobile app. This can range from time, lack of skills, imposter syndrome, and even very often than not, just fear of failure. Now let's assume you are me, and you have all this. You have relative time to work on projects, you have the skill set, you feel like you are competent enough, and most especially, you are not afraid to fail. So the big question, how do you go about taking a project from the idea phase to actually building the app and shipping it? Firstly, let's start with my background with regards to building apps. I started programming a few years ago, and my ultimate goal was to build video games. Without going into too much detail about my background, because it goes way back, I was able to build and publish a game, and since then I left game development and went straight into programming, and I've built several apps including 4 original app ideas and several website clones. The focus of this video is mainly about working on original ideas, so let's get right into it. The first thing I do before even starting to write the first line of code is to define the motive. Why should I even work on this app? I'm the kind of person who needs to have a reason for doing something before doing it, so I start by defining the reason why I need to build the app. To me, the main reason why I build an app is so it can be helpful to myself, then to others. So I generally try to find a solution for myself, then think of how I can help others before starting to plan out and build. Let me take a quick example. The first app I built, called orralearn, helped solve a problem back in my home country Cameroon, which involved calculating local money transfer rates, which was not easy to get at the time. So I built a web app, and a few months later I built the mobile app. The app didn't really go far in terms of users. It ended up having a couple of hundred users, but yeah, you get the idea. After getting the motive clearly outlined, I go straight into creating the project and writing the first line of code. This may seem a little backwards, as we generally need to plan, design, and do all that before starting, but I like to start right away with coding, as it gives me a little momentum and a sense of accomplishment. After creating my project files and writing some common pages like the login screen, the sign up, I start with the design. Remember that when you are working on a solo project, you want to work in a way that you keep working even when you feel discouraged. So make sure to start with the most exciting part so it can give you momentum to keep going. As for me, coding is more exciting than designing, so I start with that. I'm a full stack developer, so I do both the front end and the back end, so I have to come up with a way to get the design because I suck at it. For this part, I get very creative and browse through hundreds of designs on Dribble and Behance and just try to get parts of the designs I see and to kind of combine them and mix them up in order to justify the idea I have in mind. After this, I start implementing the design. If it's a web app, I use React.js to build it. If it's a mobile app, I use React Native to build it. Yeah, you have realized by now I'm totally in love with the React ecosystem. I always start with the front end first because, as I said earlier, when you're working on a solo project, it is very crucial to start by the part which makes you more excited. And as for me, it's the front end. This is because when I start with the front end, I can already visualize exactly how the end product is going to look and feel. After getting all these essential pages coded out, I can then start with the backend. I love Java, so I mostly use Spring Boot for my backend, but this requires more planning and configuring, unlike something like Node.js. So deciding what language and framework to go with your backend is very important. The choice is not too difficult for me, as I mostly go with Java, but for my latest project, I decided to go with Node.js because I just needed something that I could modify very quickly on the fly. After getting my backend working, I then now have to create endpoints and test if everything is working and returning the correct JSON. I use Postman to do this, test all my endpoints and make everything work. I've tried different tools out there, but nothing even comes close to Postman. Honestly, working on the backend is the easiest part, at least for me and for the app I built, because the app I built so far just have some basic calculations, implement other APIs and algorithms, and occasionally develop mine. After the backend comes the most tedious part of the whole entire process, that is connecting everything to the front end and making sure everything works fine. This part is tedious, most especially because it doesn't just suffice to do API calls. There is also how the data is rendered, going back and forth from front end to back end in order to fix or optimize code. A very good example is the latest app I worked on called orralearn. It's kind of like a social app for developers. So when connecting the front end and the back end to build the feed, I had to make sure only 10 posts show at a given time. Then when the user reaches at the bottom of the screen, 10 other posts needs to come up. So I had to modify the code in the front end side so it can trigger the function to call the API when the user reaches the 8th post, so it can load the next 10 posts. So I had to also modify the backend and implement pagination so it always loads the next 10 posts without loading the previous posts. This back and forth process is absolutely crucial, but yeah, it can make you go crazy. So after everything and storing user data in the database, it's time to test everything and make sure everything works fine. I usually send my apps to my friends so they can test it. I also test it myself, of course. So when I get a yes from them, I can hit deploy. Deploying web apps is relatively easy, but deploying mobile apps is a whole different story, since you have to deploy them on 2 different mobile operating systems, that is Android and iOS. The rules for both platforms may vary very significantly, and iOS is such a huge pain. So after all that, my idea is finally built and out there for everyone to use, and now I can change the world and become a billionaire. Yeah, that's what I thought. Unfortunately, that's not everything. Most of my apps are far from being fully complete. There are still bugs here and there and features to implement, and all of this takes time. That's why you see hundreds of developers working for years and years on a single app in these big tech companies. But yeah, that's how I take my app ideas from idea phase to the completion phase, and I hope this video was really helpful for you so you can do yours too. That's it for this video. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share it and subscribe, and see you in the next one.